Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Avi. So, Avi, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Hi, my name is Avi. I am a consultant, which when I come to people and they ask me about, what is a consultant? People consult about 1,000 things. They don't know 1,000 things. Basically, I work with small and medium businesses, with SMBs and with startups. I work with them on understanding their financials, understanding where their budgeting is, where they can get to, help them in understanding, and many times also revamping their pricing structures. Find pricing structures sometimes to be an afterthought for many founders, and you would think it's not, because that's where the monetization is coming from. But the fact is that it is. So that is something else that I do, and I do extensive market research too. I have a knack in finding. I like to say that I can find any piece of data people need me to find.
For sure. So, in terms of pricing structures, it's always interesting. I mean, I guess, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see founders making? Like, what kind of recommendations do you make for them in terms of how to price their services or products?
So there's a lot of mistakes. One of the things that I've seen a lot of new entrepreneurs doing is they overcomplicate their pricing. Sometimes they give you 5 or 6, or sometimes even I've seen as many as 15 different structures based on 30 different criteria. And at some point it becomes almost impossible to understand. That is one thing, a big glaring mistake. Another mistake that I see is a lot of small businesses, they look at, okay, what is the next guy doing? I want to be like that guy. I'm going to price like them. But they're not taking into account differences in what exact types of products they have. They definitely don't take into account the fact that maybe their customers are different than that of the big player out there who's been around for so many years. And another thing is they're not analyzing or reanalyzing their customers' willingness to pay on an ongoing basis. So many times they would just set a price at the beginning of their journey and then keep it there for like 3 years without even thinking about changing it or structuring it differently.
Yeah, for sure. I think I always say, I'm like, it's always important to raise your prices because, yeah, I mean, obviously you want to keep people locked in, but as you grow, right, I mean, your services get more expensive and your value is worth more based on your experience and the value that you're bringing to your client. So it is often important from time to time to increase price, especially with inflation and things like that.
That's exactly true. It's not just about increasing it, it's also about structuring it, right? It's not, you can increase for some of your customers, you don't have to increase for all, and it all depends on who they are. I think the key here is to understand who the customer is and how much they're willing to pay, and to build a monetization process or a pricing process that would optimize and maximize the value that customers can bring.
For sure. And then in terms of like SMBs, I'm always curious, right? Because there's lots of different SMBs out there. So in terms of certain verticals, are there certain verticals that you've worked more with? Are there, companies, are they based more in Orange County in the US or elsewhere? I guess, what does that look like for you?
I'm pretty agnostic, to be honest. I worked with probably over 30 or 40 industries, healthcare, e-commerce, CPG, clinics, and medical insurance companies, cyber security companies, whatever. I've worked with so many different companies. The thing that maybe I don't work with as much is if it's a highly technical product, like a geothermal solution for extracting whatever, something out of the ground, and like I don't understand what it is. I need to understand what the product is for me to actually help. But I've worked with almost over 40 industries, I think. So anything, to be honest, almost anything with English that I can understand is acceptable for me.
Are they all based in the US or have you worked like internationally as well?
I work 90% of my customers are US based. In terms of location, pretty much everywhere. I work long hours. I work early morning to late night as needed, and so that doesn't bother me. I've had a couple of customers in Australia. I've had a couple of customers in Europe, in the UK. I've had one customer in Saudi Arabia, but I would say that about 90% of my customers are.
For sure. And then in terms of your like, I guess, background, right? Because obviously before you weren't consulting, before you were helping out SMBs, what did that look like? Did you study finance, or I guess, how did you kind of go from what you were doing before to say, okay, now I can consult and advise companies on pricing and financial modeling, things like that?
So I've only been a consultant for about a year and a half now, since
Okay.
July 2023, for the most part. I have almost 20 years of experience before that. Startups and with large companies on various strategic and operational projects. I always had a knack for doing the math. So as an example, for 3 years I was internal consultant in Zurich Insurance, which is one of the biggest consulting company, one of the biggest insurance companies out there. And yes, while I did a lot of other things, I was the math guy. At the end, ultimately, I was the math guy. So I always like to work with numbers, but I've done a lot of things in other capacities as well, not just numbers, not just market research. I would say, in fact, that most of my experience before becoming my own consultant was in the cost side and the operational side, and building teams and streamlining stuff and streamlining operations and optimizing tools and products and implementing them and all that stuff. So my experience is pretty broad, but what I do as a consultant is what I love to do.
For sure. And I guess in terms of like, pricing and certain offers, right? I think there's obviously a big difference when it comes to services versus products, right? And subscriptions, things like that. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like, one thing that you mentioned, sometimes people are kind of looking at their customers. I guess in terms of, charging more, it's always a big conversation. I always, if you ever watch Shark Tank, Mark Cuban says just, charge more, charge more. So how do you really like go about even having those conversations, really even showcasing that kind of value when you do want to charge more and increase your overall revenue and profitability?
I'm an introvert and I hate talking about money. I'm very good at what I do and I love delivering stuff, like consulting, and I like building an Excel sheet. I actually hate asking for money. It's
Right,
the
right.
most awkward thing it's the one most awkward thing in my and obviously it's needed and it's required and that's what I'm doing this for. But it's obviously the most awkward. I priced myself in a way that I can win as much business as possible.
Right.
One of the reasons that I want to win as much business as possible is, which I do many times,
Yeah,
is because it gives me a way to showcase, like just like you said, it
yeah,
gives me a way to showcase what I do, and then also a larger paycheck. So yes, many of my recurring customers do have to pay me more and more as it goes,
right.
but they're happy to do so most of the time.
Yeah, I guess I was curious more, I mean, obviously, about your business, like, is one thing, but I guess in terms of like how you're advising your clients, because I think I guess you said, right, like, it's a challenge for you,
Oh,
but
okay,
I
yeah.
think but I think it's a challenge for a lot of businesses, right? It's very, especially if you're a small business. I mean, you mentioned that. I think I have that sometimes. I think many people are kind of uncomfortable asking to
Mhm.
get paid, or how much to get paid, or am I, charging too much, right? Because you really want this project. So how do you kind of like advise people, right? Because you're dealing with this too, like, to really have that balance of, okay, like, I need to go and charge enough, but I don't want to lose the business. Except, yeah, I guess I'm curious about that.
The answer is in pricing. I don't tell people to charge more. I tell people to charge what the data is telling me to tell them to
Right, right,
charge.
right. Okay.
And if that means and usually more often than not, that means segmenting your offering and offering the right product to the right people. So for example, I worked with this is a classic example. I worked with a BI company that does BI products for businesses, and they wanted me to change their pricing or find a way to optimize it. So, and I think they had like 3 tiers of pricing or something like that. But one of the things that happened there was that a lot of their customers started small. Many of their customers are like Amazon and eBay, and eBay sellers and stuff like that, e-commerce companies. And they start small and go big. How do you actually take a piece of that pie once they become even bigger? Especially if you only have 3 tiers, what do? And the solution here is something that, Google did this with their storage solutions, right? So you don't have a tiered pricing, but basically you pay per a unit of something. Units of a terabyte of hosting, right? For this company, what they did was find a way to revamp their pricing so that they get a cut from every additional sale that their customers are making, which also means that they can go in much cheaper in the beginning and have a better offering. And that was basically what guided me through this. I want to lure people. I want them to lure their customers with a very low pricing, much lower than their competitors, but I want them to be higher and sometimes even higher than their competitors once the competitor is hooked in. So I built this visualization that shows how are they versus their main 3 or 4 competitors? How do they fare? And what I wanted to see and what I did essentially was that the engagement duration and the higher the value of the customer, those 2 things, the less competitive they are versus the competitors, but it doesn't matter because they're hooked in already. So that's one idea.
Yeah, like I love that. Yeah, 100%. We do the same thing when it comes to our performance marketing services for e-commerce. It's like we have 2 offers. We have one with revenue share and one without. And we always try to push clients towards the rev share because it's a lower retainer, but it's like it really pushes us to get them better results, and it ends up being sort of like a win-win. That way we can get them more sales, we can make more money, they can make more money. And I think that's always a great way to get in the door because, yeah, I mean, we focus on value and, helping brands scale. And I think that's super, super important. So obviously, like a lot of what I do is in the e-commerce space. I'm always curious about e-commerce, right? So you mentioned that you've worked with some e-commerce brands and that you're kind of using data for pricing. So in terms of e-commerce specifically, like how have you kind of gone about that in financial modeling or helping out like an e-commerce brand per se?
I've worked with a lot. I've worked with a couple of alcohol companies actually recently, with a few apparel companies recently, online apparel, so e-commerce, I guess, is
Yeah.
all that. Um, I think that's one of my favorite things. One of my favorite clients is this guy who builds. He's very smart. He also has an apparel e-commerce company. But he built it in a way that it's the same thing. He hooked his customers. So he has a subscription model. He provides them with some kind of product. It was very interesting when I spoke to him because he kept saying, I don't care what the product is. The only thing I care about is the subscription. Is actually pricing is already done. What I help him with is mostly projections of how much his initial cohort, how much he can project for the initial cohorts. Because at some point he stopped getting more customers. He doesn't want to get more customers. He wants to build on his existing cohorts and just monetize it that way. So I help him with understanding the monetization there. And to me it's extremely interesting because that subscription model enables him to be very, very honest. It enables him to make tens of thousands of dollars, some maybe even more, I think hundreds of thousands of dollars a month
Right.
out any marketing because he doesn't even care about new customers. He has other endeavors. He's just counting on that subscription model. So that's one very, very smart model that I've seen. I wish I could do subscription in my consulting business, but it's too unique and too particular, and it's not the kind of business that you can actually do a subscription with. But it's nice to see, and I follow it closely. I've been following this closely for about 2 years now. It's to me it's amazing to see.
Yeah, 100%. I think with subscriptions, there's tons of value there, and especially in e-com, it's like oftentimes I might say in the first purchase you might break even, but it's that LTV, like that lifetime value of the customer, which can be extremely high. So, in terms of your business, you mentioned you've been doing this for about 1 year and a half now. So, if you could go back in time to before you got started, what is one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
I don't know if it's so much advice, but as much as and we touched upon this, but it is the gradual building of the capability of talking to people. I think that's something that I've built gradually. It's easier for me to do that now than it has been before. And I think, I don't know, I guess an advice would be if you're an entrepreneur that does this kind of stuff, just, talk to the mirror and see how the unpleasant things or the things that you're not as comfortable with, I guess. Yeah, I think that would be, to be honest, any piece of advice that I will tell you is not so much about the work, it's about the customer. It's about the customer piece. It's about how you talk to the customer, how the customer talks to you. For example, it took me a while to understand the personas or the way people talk when the lead is weak. There's a difference between how people talk to you when they want just to talk to you for 20 minutes about an idea, but never intend to pay you, or when people actually do want to hire you. And learning how to differentiate between the two and learning to identify the type A versus type B
Right.
is is it advice? No, it's not something I could have known a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Gradually learn this, and I wish I
Oh, for
had
sure.
that kind of capability before.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, there's definitely plenty of people that we've spoken to that sort of waste our time as well. And it's hard to know sometimes, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of learn over time, hey, is this person actually serious, or are they just looking for free consulting and free advice? You have to kind of figure out, who's who. So on that note, if we're going to have this conversation again in 1 year from now, where do you see things going for your business?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it hasn't been a bad year and a half. I would say that I've worked with 100, not hundreds, but over 100 customers. I have worked with,
Wow.
um, way over 100.
Awesome.
Um, where would I like to be? I would like to be bigger. The mathematical answer is I want to be 40% bigger. That's the answer.
There you go. That's a great
I,
answer.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Avi, if somebody's watching this and they're interested in working with you and wanted to reach out, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Best way would be my email. It's funny. In America, people don't use WhatsApp, and I always tell people that's by far my favorite way of communicating.
Right.
I don't understand SMS. Email is cool, but I look at it like 5 times a day, and then what happens in the middle?
Right.
To me, WhatsApp is the best. But email.
Yeah, if you can share it, yeah, go ahead.
Email is Avi, so AVI at avi-t-consulting.com. The reason my email is different than my company's name is because initially I created my own website, which is called AVT Consulting, avtconsulting.com, I guess, or something. And because I created it on my own and it looks horrible, once I realized that's not going to work, I then changed and built another website and asked somebody to build another website called Trachtman Consulting, so it's basically trachtmanconsulting.com, which is my main website. So my email is different than my actual website. But yeah, so it's avi-t-consulting.com.
Awesome. Well, so if you're an SMP and if you need some help with your financials, definitely reach out to Avi. And Avi, thanks so much for your time today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Have a good one.